Hearty shalom to you, Jeffrey Seif here. Glad to be walking through the scriptures with you. I have my brick in hand. This is the heavy-duty tabletop version of the Tree of Life Bible. And we are looking at the 12th chapter of the book of Acts. It's all very fascinating. We're seeing how supernaturally the gospel gets out. And against all odds, too. If you were a betting person, you might not have put any money on this movement ever getting any traction. Some crucified Jew in Jerusalem, a bunch of fishermen. To think this would change the world is just, you wouldn't have bet on it. But God has a way of accomplishing his purposes, and his way oftentimes just dwarfs our own sense and sensibility because it's that pathway is punctuated with supernatural moments. We're told in chapter 12, and I want to look here at 1 through 19 in that chapter, that Herod the king had seized some of the faith community and he was minded to do them harm. And Yaakov, Yochanan's brother, Jacob, was put to death. And we're told in verse 3 that it pleased the Jews, the Judean leaders more specifically. People are predisposed to read the biblical text with a certain bias against Jewish people. Oh, the Jews rejected Jesus and his people, so Jesus rejected all the Jews. That's really a poor handling of the text. It says more about the interpreters than it does the text. We clarify here that Judean leaders, not even all of them, but enough were predisposed. Jealous they were because the movement, Jesus and his followers were developing so much traction street side, they were concerned. Well, Peter was arrested and they really go out of their way to chain him up and guard him up. You know, in the 5th chapter, emissaries, Peter got out before. And so perhaps there's some memory of that. And here we're taking pains to have personal guard and have him chained to those guards. But even with all that, in verse 7, while Peter was sleeping the day before his slated trial and what have been his undoing, he's sleeping. Could very well be that Peter had rest in his heart because the Lord had promised him prior that he would live to his old age. In the Johannine Gospel, at the very end, Peter is assured as much. Well, he's sleeping. It reminds me, by the way, of the Psalm, "Why do the nations rage?" God is going to accomplish his purposes through his people. Suddenly in verse 7, an angel of the Lord appeared and startles him, and he doesn't quite know what to make of it, but he just follows along, and supernaturally the chains fall off, supernaturally the gates open up, and there he is. He gets out of Dodge, led by this angel, and then the angel disappears, we're told in the text. He went to the house of Miriam in verse 12. Peter is out now. He goes to Mary, and this is the mother of John, who's also called Mark, who's introduced into the narrative. He goes to a home there, and Peter knocks on the door. Rhoda, a slave girl, answers the door. There's a prayer meeting inside. This tells you, by the way, that this Miriam had some means, a woman of some wealth. And John Mark is introduced into the narrative. He's going to have a falling out later on. But this John Mark arguably will be the author of the Gospel of Mark. It's another story. The point here is that this woman, Miriam, had some means, and she opened up her home to a meeting, and they're praying in there. It's really interesting. The disciples are praying. Of course, Peter was arrested. They're concerned that he's going to be undone, and they're praying. And all of a sudden, Peter knocks on the door, and the slave girl recognizes the voice and just leaves him standing out there. Guess what? Guess what? Peter is here. Well, shut up, lady. You know, we're praying for him right now. No, he's here. I'll be quiet. You're crazy. They didn't expect it to happen so soon. Or maybe they didn't expect it to happen at all. I don't know. But they were praying for him, and he was out there. Well, you know, this is going on, and you get to verse 16. But Peter kept on knocking, we're told in the text. And when they saw him, they were amazed. Let me just camp here for a minute. When we see God at work in the world, in so many ways, it really is amazing. It dwarfs our senses and sensibilities. God's ways are greater than ours, and there's miracles in accomplishing his purposes. And we see breakthroughs, even in getting this Bible to you. There were breakthroughs, just miracles. Now, Danya certainly slugged it out, prayerfully and, in carrying the burden, and she still does. But it's really not by human effort. There's a verse, not by might, not by power, but by my spirit, says the Lord. It's like that. Seems to me that God's people get themselves in trouble because we're driven by certain energies and interests of what we want to do for the kingdom. And a lot of times those energies prompt us to run ahead of our resources. And it takes a little more than what we can muster. There's an old hippie song, I can get by with a little help from some friends, but we can get by with a little help from a friend above who actually imposes or suggests, he stimulates individuals to do his bidding for them. He works through people. Every donation we've ever received came through a person. It didn't just fall out of the sky like manna. Well, what happens here is they were amazed when Peter showed up, and he motions and he explains to them the story of how he was released. It's a fascinating story. And let me just say, as I put the landing gear down, and by the way, these are very short flights. As soon as I get the plane up, I got to get it down right away. They're little hops, skips, and jumps. But it's good to know that God has a way of accomplishing his purposes and helping us in the process, because sometimes it just becomes so very, very difficult, and we see that here. I don't know where you find yourself at this particular hearing. We find ourselves at different places in life. For me, I'm sitting in my study, but I'm getting ready to go to Israel and do some work over there. But sometimes we find ourselves in places that are less enthusiastic. I'm very encouraged to be able to do what I do at this juncture, but I've had road bumps, ups and downs. If you're at a down place, I want you to know that God is very able to turn it into an upper place. This is amply attested as we look in the book of Acts, chapter 12, verses 1 through 19. God bless.